The day was ordinary, marked by the mundane tasks that filled my life as a software developer. My apartment, a modern yet modest space in the city's heart, was my sanctuary from the world's chaos. It was here, amidst the soft hum of electronics and the comforting glow of screens, that my belief in the tangible, the explainable, was unshakable. The incident began innocuously enough, with the arrival of a letter. No return address, no stamp, just my name scrawled in a shaky hand on the front. Inside, a single piece of paper, blank except for a cryptic message in the same trembling script: "Beware the Ides of March." A prank, I had thought, tossing the letter aside. I had no time for such nonsense, not with deadlines looming and the ever-present demands of life pressing in. The first of the strange occurrences was easy enough to dismiss. A whisper of movement in the periphery of my vision. A shadow that seemed to flicker and vanish when looked upon directly. My apartment, with its plethora of gadgets and the constant draft from the poorly sealed windows, was no stranger to odd sounds and movements. I attributed it to the wind, or perhaps a trick of the light. But as the days wore on, the phenomena became harder to rationalize away. Objects began to move, ever so slightly, from where I had left them. A book would find its way to the floor, its pages fluttering as though caught in a non-existent breeze. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway when no one was there, and the whispers grew louder, a murmur of voices speaking just below the threshold of understanding. In a moment of desperation or perhaps madness, I turned to the internet, diving into forums and ancient texts, searching for any explanation that might make sense of the madness encroaching on my life. That's when I stumbled upon the story of the previous tenant, a young woman who had vanished without a trace. Her disappearance had been a mystery, the only clue a journal found beneath the floorboards, filled with ramblings about being watched and whispers in the dark. It was on a night, much like any other, save for the storm that raged outside, that I had my first direct encounter. The power had flickered out, leaving me in darkness, save for the flash of lightning that illuminated my surroundings in stark, white light. I had felt it then, a presence in the room with me, something cold and malevolent. As the lightning flashed, I saw it, a shadow against the shadows, tall and thin, with eyes that gleamed like coals. It moved towards me, and I could do nothing but stare, frozen in terror as the air grew colder, the whispers louder. It was real, all of it, the letter, the movements, the disappearance of the previous tenant. I was not alone. The entity vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving me trembling in the dark, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the storm's fury outside. I knew then that I could no longer deny the existence of the supernatural. My world had changed, irrevocably, and I was in danger. In the days that followed my first direct encounter with the entity, the manifestations grew both in intensity and malice. Objects no longer just moved, they flew across the room with force, shattering against walls, as if thrown by unseen hands. Doors slammed shut, trapping me inside rooms, their locks clicking as though operated by invisible fingers. The whispers evolved into voices, clear and distinct, calling my name, dripping with malevolence. Sleep became an elusive dream, marred by nightmares of shadowy figures and waking to the sensation of being watched. My sanctuary had become my prison, the once comforting confines of my apartment now a stage for a malevolent presence that reveled in my fear. Desperate for help, I reached out to friends, who listened with a mix of skepticism and concern. They suggested logical explanations: stress, overwork, perhaps even the need for a psychological evaluation. I knew better. I had seen the impossible, felt its cold breath upon my neck. This was no figment of my imagination, no trick of the mind. In a last-ditch effort, I contacted a supposed expert in the paranormal, a medium who claimed the ability to communicate with spirits and cleanse homes of their presence. The day of the appointment came, but the medium never did. Calls went unanswered, messages unreturned. I was alone, abandoned by those who could not understand, could not believe. As the entity's attacks grew more personal, more violent, it became clear that it sought not just to scare, but to harm. My own home felt like a battlefield, every shadow a potential enemy, every silence a precursor to another assault. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving me questioning my own sanity. The climax of this terror came one stormy night, much like the night of my first encounter. The air was charged with electricity, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. I had decided to confront the entity, armed with an array of supposed spiritual protections gleaned from my frantic research: salt, sage, symbols of protection drawn in desperation on the walls of my apartment. As the clock struck midnight, the air grew cold, the familiar sense of presence overwhelming. I stood in the center of my living room, the eye of the storm, and spoke directly to the shadow that had haunted me, demanding it reveal itself. Leave my home. For a moment, there was silence. Then, laughter, cold and mocking, filled the room, swirling around me. The entity materialized, more terrifying than ever, its form shifting, a maelstrom of shadows with eyes that burned. It spoke, a voice like ice, promising that no symbols, no words, could protect me. I was its chosen, marked from the moment I entered this place. The confrontation was brief, terrifying. Objects hurled through the air with deadly force, shadows twisting into shapes that defied nature. I fought with everything I had, clinging to the hope that I could drive it away. But as quickly as it had escalated, it ended. The entity vanished, leaving behind a silence more oppressive than before. In the days that followed, an uneasy peace settled over my apartment. The attack ceased, the whispers quieted. Had I succeeded? Had I driven the entity away with my defiance? Or had it simply grown bored with its game? Life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Though the shadows of what I had experienced lingered, friends remarked on the change in me, the haunted look in my eyes, the jumpiness at every unexpected noise. I laughed it off, tried to move on, but inside, the fear remained, a constant companion. Then, one evening, as I prepared to finally leave the apartment behind, to move on to a new place, a new life free from the shadows of the past, I found it, a photograph, tucked beneath the edge of a mirror. It was of the previous tenant, smiling, carefree, and behind her, barely visible in the shadow, were those familiar, burning eyes. The move was supposed to be a fresh start, a break from the city's constant noise and the relentless pace of my career as a software developer. The house, nestled in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, was an old, Victorian-era structure that had been on the market for years before I stumbled upon it. It was charming in its way, with intricate woodwork and a sprawling garden that had run wild from years of neglect. It was the kind of place that, with a bit of care, could become a home. I remember walking through the empty rooms the day I got the keys, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the high ceilings and hardwood floors. There was a sense of history in those walls, a feeling of untold stories that piqued my curiosity and, if I was honest, gave me a slight chill. Rationality told me it was just the unfamiliarity of the place, the natural reaction to being alone in a large, old house. The discovery of the journal was entirely accidental. I had been exploring the attic, a space filled with forgotten items from previous occupants, furniture covered in dust sheets, boxes of old books, and trinkets. It was there, in a small, wooden chest that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades, that I found it. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible, though it ranged from meticulously neat to frantic scrawls. It belonged to someone named Elizabeth, a previous resident, and it detailed her life in the house, her dreams, and, increasingly, her fears. Sketches filled the margins, eyes, shadows, and figures that seemed more sinister than decorative. At first, I read it with a historian's interest, a peek into the personal thoughts of someone who had lived in my new home over a century ago. But as I delved deeper, the entries grew more troubled. Elizabeth wrote of feeling watched, of hearing whispers at night, and of shadows that moved of their own accord. It was unsettling, but I rationalized it as the product of a bygone era's superstitions. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that settled over me, an echo of Elizabeth's fear that seemed to permeate the attic. The first few weeks passed without incident, my initial unease fading as I settled into a routine. The house, with all its quirks and creaks, began to feel like home. That is, until the night I heard the whispers. I had chalked up the sense of being watched to the adjustment period of living alone in a large house, but there was no mistaking the soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to come from just outside my bedroom door late one night. I told myself it was the wind, or perhaps the house settling, despite the stillness of the air and the solid construction that had withstood over 100 years. Then came the shadows. More than once, I caught glimpses of something moving at the edge of my vision, too quick to be seen directly, but undeniably there. Objects began to shift slightly from where I'd left them. A book on the coffee table turned to a different page. A vase moved to another spot on the mantel. Each incident was minor, easily explained away individually, but together they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. My attempts to share these experiences were met with skepticism. Friends joked about my haunted house, offering logical explanations or suggesting it was all in my head. Their laughter was well-intentioned, but it left me feeling isolated, my concerns unvoiced and unvalidated. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I began to research the house's history. Local archives revealed a series of tragedies associated with the property: untimely deaths, unexplained disappearances, and a general malaise that seemed to hang over the place through the decades. Elizabeth's journal entries took on a new significance, her words a warning from the past that I was now living. One evening, as I sat reading through more historical documents, the temperature in the room dropped sharply. The air grew thick, heavy with a sense of anticipation. Then, clear and distinct against the silence, I heard my name whispered, as if from right behind me. I turned, heart racing, to find nothing but the empty room and the creeping shadows at its edges. The realization hit me then, a cold wave of understanding. I was not alone in this house, and whatever shared it with me was making itself known. The night of the power outage was a turning point. The storm that raged outside was violent, a furious display of nature's power that seemed almost personal in its intensity. Lightning illuminated the house in brief, stark flashes, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and move of their own accord. It was in one of these moments of enforced darkness that I felt it most acutely, the unmistakable sensation of not being alone. The air in the room grew colder, a palpable presence that enveloped me in a shroud of dread. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that seemed to speak directly into my ear, yet I could discern no words. And then, in the flickering light of a lightning flash, I saw it, a figure, dark and indistinct, standing at the threshold of my bedroom door. It was taller than any man, its edges blurred as if made of smoke, and where its eyes should have been, there were only deeper pools of darkness. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, transfixed by the apparition before me. As quickly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving behind a lingering sense of malevolence and the unmistakable feeling of being watched. That night, I did not sleep. I sat awake, lights ablaze, waiting for dawn and the semblance of normalcy it might bring. In the days that followed, the entity made its presence known with increasing aggression. Objects didn't just move, they were hurled across rooms with force. Doors slammed shut of their own volition, trapping me inside rooms, or worse, leaving me feeling exposed and vulnerable in the open spaces of the house. The whispers became voices, mocking and cruel, their words now intelligible, filled with threats and warnings. I was under siege in my own home, each day bringing a new terror, a new proof of the entity's power. I reached out in desperation, seeking help from anyone who would listen. A local psychic came, her face paling as she crossed the threshold. She spoke of dark energies, of a presence that was both ancient and malevolent. Her advice was to leave, but this was my home, my sanctuary. I couldn't abandon it so easily. Armed with sage and salt, symbols and prayers from a dozen different traditions, I attempted to cleanse the house. Each effort seemed only to provoke it further, the entity's responses more violent, more personal. It was during one such attempt that I found the hidden room, tucked away behind a false wall in the basement. It was a small, windowless space with walls covered in strange symbols, the air thick with the residue of fear. In the center of the room was a table, atop which lay a collection of objects that sent a chill down my spine: old photographs, candles, a knife, and a book that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was clear that something unholy had taken place in that room, a ritual or ceremony that had invited something into the house, something that had never left. The discovery of the hidden room was the catalyst for the final confrontation. Armed with the knowledge of the entity's origins, I prepared to face it, to banish it from my home once and for all. The storm that night seemed a mirror of my own turmoil, lightning and thunder a backdrop to the battle of wills that unfolded. I stood in the center of the hidden room, the book from the table opened before me, its pages filled with incantations and symbols of power. I spoke the words. My voice steadied despite the fear that gripped me. The entity answered, its form coalescing from the shadows, more defined now, its malevolence a palpable force that threatened to overwhelm me. We fought, its power against my will, the air alive with energy that crackled and sparked. I was losing, my strength waning, when suddenly, the entity faltered. The symbols on the walls began to glow, a warm, golden light that seemed to burn it. With a scream that shook the foundations of the house, it vanished, leaving behind a silence so profound it rang in my ears. In the aftermath, the house was quiet, the oppressive atmosphere gone as if it had never been. I began the long process of healing, of repairing the physical and emotional damage the entity had caused. For a time, it seemed as if I had succeeded, as if my life could return to some semblance of normalcy. But peace, it seems, was only an illusion. Objects have started to move again, ever so slightly. Whispers fill the silence of the night, and shadows linger just a bit too long. The entity, it appears, is not gone, merely biding its time, waiting for the moment to reveal itself once more. And as I stand in the quiet of my home, I can't shake the feeling that the battle I thought I had won was only the beginning.